Hello everyone, I'm really very happy to be part of this Ask the Author series that is being run by one of my most favorite bookstores, Ata Galata, and by my very dear friends, Subodh, Lakshmi, and Shiny. So, thank you so much for inviting me to this series. And I was told by Subodh that there were lots and lots of questions that came up, out of which he had a tough time shortlisting about 80 questions. Out of which I had to choose about three of them, and so you can imagine how difficult a choice that would be. Of course, I must mention that at the outset that the common question that came, which even I saw on social media, was when is the volume 2 of Savarkar coming? I'm really, very sorry to all my readers for disappointing them by, it's no on purpose that the delays happening on the release of the volume 2. It's just that I think world over everything has slowed down with COVID, and particularly in books like this, works like this, which require a lot of travel, a lot of research. I think a lot of my timelines have gotten decelerated because of the lockdown. Now, slowly with things opening up and with travel resuming, I hope to restart my research, and we've reworked timelines with my publisher as well, Penguin Random House India, and I think by the middle of next year, 2021, is when we hope, and we're being optimistic about having volume 2 of the book released. I'm very, very grateful and thankful to this love, to this to this constant questioning that I get on social media all the time, which just goes to show how much people are waiting to know about the rest of the story of Savarkar's life from 1924, which is where I left off volume 1 at. Of course, before that volume 2 comes up, the Hindi version, the Hindi translation of the book, as also in Marathi, Telugu, and some other languages are also underway. So I'm sure those will come up before that. And the audio book of volume 1 is already up on Audible. So those of you who prefer to hear a book rather than read it can check that out. So coming now to the questions that I had a very tough time shortlisting. First of all, thank you to all the readers who've asked all the questions. It's just a matter of picking up three for the sake of it, and that's what I'm doing here. I will start with what Ashish Kedia asks me. He's asked several questions. One of them, which I found was interesting, Savarkar hasn't even been formally acknowledged as a part of the Indian freedom struggle by the establishment for the better part of 70 years now. The status quo, however, is slowly changing. What do you think is Savarkar's rightful place in Indian history, and will he ever reach there? That, Ashish, I think is a very interesting question, and you're absolutely right that I think due to due to a lot of political considerations, due to it's very unfortunate that that someone like Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, who contributed so much to the cause of Indian freedom, has been kept away from the mainstream narrative of the Indian freedom struggle, which is still okay. I mean, lots of others also have been kept out of the narrative. But then what is worse is him being constantly maligned, him being constantly abused almost to be called like as a stooge of the British, or someone who was a coward, who cowered to the British through the so-called infamous petitions, mercy petitions, and all of that, which is far from truth. And I think I've explained that in detail in my book, as also in numerous talks and lectures online and offline. So it's when you say what do you think is Savarkar's rightful place in Indian history. I mean, here was a young man when he was in his youth. He was somebody who started India's first organized secret society, modeled much on the lines of what the Italian revolutionaries, Mazzini and Garibaldi and others had done. The Tarun Bharat, the Abhinav Bharat, the Mitra Mela, and later it was initially called the Rashtra Bhakta Samuha, and later took all these other names of Abhinav Bharat, and that became a force to reckon with for the British, not only while he was in India, but in the 5 stormy years that he spent in London. Here was also a man who organized the first ever student bonfire of foreign clothes in 1905 as a protest against the partition of Bengal that Lord Curzon had imposed, inspired by Tilak. And so when we think of the bonfire and Swadeshi, the immediate image that comes to mind is that of Mahatma Gandhi. But this was 1905 that I'm talking of, and this was also the time when Savarkar, as well as several other freedom fighters of the revolutionary kind, were demanding for total and complete freedom, not piecemeal negotiations, not concessions that the moderate faction of the Congress was demanding. So complete freedom. Even Purna Swaraj was something that the Congress as a party took up as a cause only in 1930, but then almost 25 years before that, here were people who were campaigning actively not only within India but across continents to get this, to also put India's case in an international scenario. Savarkar was also somebody who spearheaded the Indian revolutionary movement from outside India, provided that intellectual corpus to our freedom struggle through the several books he wrote, the translation of Mazzini's biography, and more importantly his seminal work, The First War of Indian Independence. He was the first one to coin that term also for what was hitherto called as Sepoy Mutiny in a very disparaging way. So using British documents, using the British archival records in London for 2 long years, he researched and then came up with this book, which became a source of inspiration not only for revolutionaries of his time but even later on. People like Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, Rajguru, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Rash Bihari Bose, all of them, and I mentioned that again in my book about how all of them drew inspiration from this particular book that Savarkar wrote. So his contribution there is also something that is seldom known or talked about. Savarkar also as a political ideologue, someone who defined the entire concept of Hindutva, which is political Hinduism, if I can use that term, to counter the rising wave of a pan-Islamist movement that was raging in India and outside. And we know that Hindutva, since the time Savarkar postulated it in the detail that he did in 1923, has come to occupy center stage in Indian politics. So his role also in Indian history as a progenitor of this new political philosophy, which one may agree or disagree, but then the whole idea of conceptualizing this, of defining Indianness not just by territorial limits or borders, but as a cultural and a national identity of what it means to be a Hindu, not in terms of the religious or theological construct of the term, but by your cultural identity, so to say. So that too is a very important contribution. His social reforms that he did for 13 long years when he was under house arrest in Ratnagiri are again seminal, which are seldom spoken about. Here was a Chitpavan Brahmin who was talking of complete annihilation and a dismantlement of the Varnashrama system, and advocating intercaste dining, intercaste marriage. The first ever temple in the country in 1931 called the Patit Pavan Mandir, which was thrown open to people of all castes and creeds, and where the priest was someone who was from the lowest of the castes, and even the Brahmin had to go and fall at his feet. So several such revolutionary social reforms for which he faced a lot of backlash in his time from the orthodoxy in Maharashtra and outside. Even as when he took over as the president of the All India Hindu Mahasabha, most of his public speeches or public appearances, there would be protests by not only the Congress, which was his political rival, but also by orthodox associations which disagreed with his almost nihilist approach to caste reform. So I think all of this are his rightful place. A sensitive poet, a very, very, very fiery orator, at the same time also a playwright who wrote on a series of themes, a journalist a writer, someone who strove a lot for the purification of the Marathi language through his Bhasha Shuddhi that he did. So literature, so a man with multiple facets. So that's how I would, deem Savarkar as. Will he ever reach that rightful place in Indian history? I think light is the best disinfectant, and as and how these facts come out in public domain, I think it's up to the people, the readers, who will for themselves discern what this man was and what aspects of his life and philosophy are there for you to accept and what to reject. And thereby he gets, I think, his rightful place in Indian history, not through government recognitions, not through awards and all of that, which are, I think, in my view, highly ephemeral. So that's the long answer to your question, Ashish. The other question, which was again very interesting, which I thought was what Vidya Karthikeyan asked me. When we visited the Andaman Cellular Jail a few years ago, I was deeply impacted by reading Savarkar's letter about the torture, both physical and mental, that they faced at the hands of the British. I think of him since then as a true freedom fighter who did not run behind the perks of positions once India became free. In the process of writing this book, what was an incident about him that impacted you the most? Thank you, Vidya. That was a very wonderful, question. Well, it's difficult to point to any one particular incident about him, but then a few things that stick on in my mind, Vidya, has been the fact that while we talk about these men, even Vinayak or his brother Ganesh Damodar, we seldom speak or even remember the role that the women in their lives played. So I think what impacted me while reading the memoirs, while talking to members of his family and to others, historians and others, and looking at the archival documents, was the fact that his sister-in-law Yeshu Vahini and his wife Yamuna Bai, I mean, the kind of sufferings that these women and the women of substance that they bore all of that with the kind of fortitude, is something that really is very, very moving. All the brothers, there were three brothers, Ganesh, Vinayak and Narayan Rao. The first two of them were packed off to cellular jail, Kalapani in Port Blair. Narayan Rao was also in and out of jail because the British were always suspicious of the Savarkar brothers. And the society too had almost ostracized the entire Savarkar family. They were almost led to penury. And when the Savarkar brothers were convicted in the Nashik murder case, their entire property was confiscated. So including utensils in the house were actually taken over by the government and auctioned. So their house, their property, their bare minimum possessions, everything taken away. And society, strangely, had also ostracized them as wives of criminals. And so even to eke a living, it was so difficult for these women. And it was left to another woman, Madam Bhikaji Kama, who was far away in Europe, and it was she who would send some money to the family for their upkeep. So, and Savarkar himself, he had a degree from Ferguson College in Pune and then went on to do law from London. Now, after he was convicted, the British government took away all his degrees from him. So on paper, he was just a metric pass. So for the entire family, the men and more so the women, to face this kind of suffering and still keep up that zeal for the country, I think was something that really, really, really moved me. And one incident that comes to mind is when I read in his memoirs in Marathi, Maji Janma Tape, or My Transportation for Life. It's when he's kept in the Dongri jail in Bombay before being sent away to Port Blair. And that's when his wife Yamuna and her brother come to meet him. And it's the first time they've met after so many years, 6-7 years. In the interim, their only son has also died, a little kid. So there's a lot of family trauma that has passed on as well. And once these two meet, there's under the watchful eye of a British guard who's also timing the entire meeting so that they don't exceed the time. So even then, she's seeing him in prisoner's clothes. Yamuna breaks down. And Savarkar tells him that, only the clothes have changed, and I'm still the same. And actually these clothes help me keep warm in the winter. And he says even dogs, cats, parrots, kites, all of them also procreate, they have families and so on. But we have broken our family utensils so that the kitchen hearths of millions in this country can be ablaze for centuries to come. And then both of them break down. And in fact, immediately after that, Yamuna, of course, walks away without even looking back, and Savarkar is looking at his wife and brother-in-law as their visage, disappears. And on coming back to his cell, something more, emotional happens, where his only company was the nest of a bird, a mother bird, which is whose eggs have hatched, and these little ones are all screeching all the time. So he keeps himself entertained looking at this play. The sensitive poet in him, is looking at that. Now, immediately after this emotional incident with his wife, he comes back to his cell and he notices that the mother bird had gone out to get some food for the little ones, and accidentally, the gunshot of a jailer hits her and she's dead, and all the little ones are screeching, hungry for food. So that kind of churns something inside him. It was almost onomatopic to see what happening outside was the turmoil inside. And he also mentions very openly there that I almost wanted to commit suicide at that time. So I think these anecdotes and incidents from his life, and like you, when I went to the cellular jail and spent a lot of time with the chief superintendent there, Miss Rashida, who was of immense help to me, I remember coming back to the hotel, and it was very tough for me to compose myself, to see not only the kind of tortures that Savarkar but all other political prisoners of his time faced there. The Indian Bastille that it was. And more so, I think what riled me, what really moved me, was the fact that we have been such an ungrateful nation. We don't even acknowledge the sufferings of these ancestors of ours who gave up their lives for our freedom so that you and I can breathe in fresh air in India. So forgetting them, or even not even acknowledging or thanking them, their names have been thrown away in the dustbins of history. I think that moved me as much as the fact that they had to undergo what they did, many of them going senile, many of them committing suicide, many of them being executed there or put to the most inhuman tortures. So I think that is what impacted me the most. Now the last question is by Venkat Ramakrishna. Hi Vikram, so much of research has gone into your books. How do you research on the topics? Internet, other books, or visiting places? Venkat, that's an interesting question. I wish there was an answer to it. And I think the joy of research for me is the fact that there is no roadmap. There is really no set path that I have. Each book has its own journey, and there are clues that come up on the way and lead me to the path of research, and that's what keeps the intellectual the rigor of the whole thing, the joy almost of investigative journalism, of finding clues and following up on them, which makes it so interesting. So while it's certainly not the internet, of course internet might give some clues and so on, other books, sure, visiting places a lot, but then like, for instance, to give you an example of my book on Gauhar Jan, so this was, at least Savarkar is a known figure about whom I'm actually having a problem of plenty. There's so much of archival material, so what to choose and what to leave, that's the bigger problem rather than a lack of material. Whereas in the case of Gauhar Jan, this was a Tavaif who had died way back in 1930 in Mysore, and with no heirs, legal heirs or students or anything. But then I was so fascinated by her story that I decided to almost on an impulse, when I came across her reference to her death in Mysore, I decided that her story deserved to be told, and I didn't know how. And I knew it was like, looking for a needle in a haystack. And over 4 long years that followed, I literally chased her across not only India but outside Azamgarh, where she was born, Banaras, Rampur, Darbhanga, Calcutta, Madras, Bombay, then outside India to Berlin, to London, to kind of put together pieces of this jigsaw puzzle that her life had become. And even there, so while setting out on the research, how do I know that I need to go to Azamgarh first, I need to go to Banaras next? No clue. Each one gives leads which you then follow up on, and then something very miraculous happens. For instance, while in Calcutta, I came across, this reference to the court cases that she fought in her life, where she had to prove her parentage and so on. And I wanted to, of course, it was in a Bengali journal, and I went to look for the court papers in the Calcutta High Court. And I realized that the Calcutta High Court, while it was shifting its premises, in its supreme wisdom decided that all civil cases pre-independence were largely useless, and they had to make a huge bonfire of this. And in that, Gauhar Jan's papers were also burned down. Now, but then I wasn't so willing to give up. Somebody in the court told me that there was a gentleman who was working in the court, who was a great admirer of Gauhar Jan, who had actually photocopied all these papers. So I went on a trail to look for him, and that was a trail in itself. Then after finally locating the man and his house, I realized to my dismay that the person had died, and his wife was so suspicious, a senior citizen who was very, very suspicious of this young man from Bangalore who had come looking for papers that her husband had photocopied. So she was almost suspicious that her husband might be penalized for pilfering papers from the court or whatever. So she refused to part with those, and I and a friend of mine, Sanjay Khanna, we made several entreaties to her, several visits to her house. She said, we have to ask my sons, and only if they give permission, and so beg, plead with her every day, saying our motives are clean, and we have nothing against your husband, or we're not going to put you into trouble. All of that, finally she got so fed up of me, and that she just threw those papers and said, take it and don't show me your face again. So so this is how, and that those papers became the main source for that book on Gauhar Jan, because they spoke about her entire parentage, they spoke about a whole lot about her life, if you would know if you've read the book already. So that's what I'm trying to say, where there is no set path, there is no set rule, and I think one leads to the other, and that's the whole joy of exploration, the joy of discovery, because if you already knew where to go and how to set things out, then it becomes a very routine and monotonous affair. So it's a combination of many things. It's a combination of translation of works. So the need to also learn different languages for a historian to be able to decipher in their original the works of the past, interviews with people, particularly like in the case of Savarkar, interviews of his proponents, his opponents, the family members if they are still around, archival material both in India and outside. So that encompasses the entire trail of research, after which to gather all of that, to be able to put it into a cogent, interesting narrative, where it doesn't end up also becoming a hagiographical account where you're extolling your subject and protagonist so much, but you're also stepping back and taking that objective and dispassionate look, and also analyzing the faults in the person with whom you've actually fallen in love with, considering you've spent so much of time ruminating about the person. So I think that is the process of research. There is no set path, and each book, each subject drives the researcher on a path which is very unique, but at the same time very, very fulfilling. So thank you so much for these very, very wonderful questions. I do hope I've answered them to the best of your satisfaction. And once again, many, many thanks to Aata Galata, to Subodh and Lakshmi for inviting me to this series, and for making Savarkar available to so many readers through your medium. Thank you.